Many people begin intermittent fasting with a sense of hope. They've heard stories about rapid weight loss, mental clarity, and regaining control simply by changing meal timing. Yet many of those same people quit after just a few days, sometimes after only their first attempts. And the key point is this: they don't quit because fasting doesn't work. They quit because they misunderstand fasting from the very beginning. Most people enter intermittent fasting with a very specific expectation that's rarely spoken aloud: that it's a shortcut. Skip breakfast and the body will automatically burn fat. Fast for a few days and willpower will strengthen. Cravings will disappear. And from there, everything will become easy. When the story is told that way, fasting sounds like a quick upgrade for body and mind. Less effort, more results. The problem is that biology doesn't operate according to those appealing narratives. The human body doesn't change simply because you decide to eat later than yesterday. It doesn't erase decades of habits, stress, sleep deprivation, and emotional eating overnight. Metabolism isn't a switch you can flip with intention. It's a living system shaped by history. And when you begin fasting, that entire history doesn't vanish. It reveals itself. So when hunger arrives sooner than expected, when energy feels unstable, when the mind isn't clearer but actually noisier, the most common reaction isn't curiosity, it's self-judgment. Something is wrong with me. My body isn't like other people's. Maybe this just isn't for me. That moment matters. Because right there, many people stop questioning their expectations and start doubting themselves. Fasting shifts from being a biological method to a personal test. And once it's experienced as a personal failure, quitting becomes almost inevitable. What very few people are prepared for is this: the initial discomfort isn't a sign that fasting is failing. It's a sign that the body is responding appropriately to change. Your nervous system doesn't know you're pursuing health. It only knows that a familiar energy pattern has been disrupted, and its top priority isn't fat loss or optimization, it's safety. When a familiar energy source doesn't arrive on schedule, the body responds by amplifying hunger signals, creating urgency, and pushing you back toward old behaviors, not to sabotage your effort, but to protect you in the way it's been programmed to do. When people don't understand this, they label completely normal biological responses as failure. The truth is that fasting doesn't make people fail, misaligned expectations do. When you expect immediate results from a system that needs time to adapt, disappointment is unavoidable. And until that perspective changes, even the best method will feel like the wrong path. Fasting isn't designed to prove how strong you are. It's designed to give the body a chance to relearn how to use energy. Understanding that from the outset is the boundary between those who quit quietly and those who are patient enough to continue to the point where fasting truly begins to work. 1. Fasting is not an on-off switch for fat burning. Intermittent fasting appears to fail for many people not because they're doing it wrong, but because they believe a deeply misleading idea: that human metabolism works like a switch. Eat and you store fat. Don't eat and you burn fat. It sounds simple. It sounds logical. And precisely because it's so simple, it misleads millions of people from the very first days. The human body doesn't switch to fat burning just because you skip breakfast today. It doesn't forget decades of being trained to rely on glucose simply because you decide to eat later. Biology doesn't respond to determination. It responds to history, to repeated patterns, to what's been reinforced over long periods of time. For years, the body has learned a very clear lesson. Food arrives frequently. Glucose is always available, and insulin rises continuously to process that incoming energy. Every meal, every snack, every late-night bite reinforces that lesson. The result is a body that becomes extremely efficient at burning sugar, but increasingly clumsy when it needs to access fat. Fat doesn't disappear, it's effectively locked away because the system is no longer accustomed to using it. So when you begin fasting, the body doesn't interpret that as a signal to optimize. Its first response isn't transformation, it's vigilance. It senses that something familiar has vanished. And in biology, anything that disappears suddenly is interpreted as risk. The body immediately turns to the fuel it trusts most: glycogen, the stored glucose in the liver and muscles. As those stores begin to decline, hunger signals don't just appear, they intensify. The brain applies pressure. A sense of urgency forms, not because you're failing, but because the system is trying to restore what it believes is a safe state. This is the crucial moment most people misinterpret. They feel hungry and assume fasting isn't working. They feel tired and conclude their body isn't suited for it. They feel mental fog and believe the method is harming them. But what's actually happening is an error. It's transition. Imagine a hybrid car that has run on gasoline its entire life. The electric system exists, but it's rarely used. The first time you try to switch to electric mode, things won't be smooth. There's lag. There's hesitation. There's instability. That doesn't mean the electric system is broken, it means it was never trained. Fat burning works the same way. The shift from glucose dependence to fat utilization is called metabolic flexibility. And flexibility, by definition, doesn't appear instantly. It's a biological skill that has to be rebuilt, especially in bodies that have spent years in states of excess, high insulin, chronic stress, and disrupted sleep. During this transition phase, discomfort is normal, not because fasting is failing, but because the old system is giving way to a new one. The tragedy is that most people quit at exactly this moment. They stand at the threshold of adaptation, feel the friction, and turn back, believing the method has betrayed them, when in reality, their body is doing precisely what it needs to do. Fasting doesn't fail in the early days. Expectations do. And until people learn to recognize transition, instead of labeling failure, they will never move past the phase where fasting begins to feel lighter, clearer, and sustainable. 2. Willpower does not increase the brain, is resisting. When people begin fasting, many believe they are stepping into a more disciplined version of themselves. They assume that simply by not eating, their willpower will grow stronger, control will become clearer, and cravings will automatically disappear. But what actually happens in reality is often the complete opposite. The early days of fasting do not feel like victory. They feel tense, conflicted, and filled with exhausting internal dialogue. This confuses many people. They wonder why they feel weaker, more easily shaken, even more preoccupied with food than before. And then they conclude that the problem lies within themselves. A lack of discipline, a lack of determination, a lack of willpower. But the truth is, in this phase, willpower is not weakening. It is being forced into a battle it was never designed to win. The human brain is not programmed to welcome sudden change, especially changes related to energy. For many years, the brain has learned that glucose arrives regularly, quickly, and reliably. Glucose is not just fuel. It is a safety signal. It tells the brain that the environment is stable, that there is no need for vigilance, that everything is under control. When you begin fasting and glucose no longer arrives at its familiar scheduled times, the brain does not interpret this as a health strategy. It interprets it as a sign of instability, and the brain's first response is not cooperation, but resistance. This resistance is not loud or dramatic. It shows up as very familiar, very reasonable, and very persuasive thoughts. Just a little food won't hurt. I'm too stressed today. I can fast tomorrow instead. Maybe my body just isn't meant for this. These thoughts are not signs of weakness. They are survival circuitry functioning exactly as intended. The brain evolved to keep you alive, not to make you lean, fit, or metabolically optimized. When a familiar energy source is disrupted, the brain will do whatever it can to pull you back to what it believes is a safe state, including generating urgency, doubt, or self-criticism. The problem is that many people misunderstand the nature of willpower. They think of it as an unlimited resource, that with enough determination, they can override all biological signals. But willpower is more like a neural muscle. It fatigues when overused. And in the early stages of fasting, willpower is asked to do far too many things at once. resist hunger, change eating habits, handle work, emotions, stress, and personal expectations. It's no surprise that it depletes quickly. Early fasting does not build willpower. It exposes the limits of willpower. And this often causes people to turn inward with blame. Constant thoughts about food, cravings, and mental fatigue get labeled as personal failure. But in reality, these are signs of a brain reorganizing how it manages energy. The brain needs time to learn that not eating immediately does not equal danger. Until that lesson is encoded, hunger signals will remain loud, persistent, and pressuring. This is a paradox very few people understand. Real willpower is not built by forcing yourself to endure chaos, but by creating enough stability for the brain to stand down from alarm. When fasting is practiced with understanding, preparation, and an appropriate pace, something begins to shift. The brain gradually lowers its vigilance. Cravings lose their urgency. Hunger stops issuing commands and becomes information. And at that point, willpower no longer has to strain against every small impulse. It becomes quieter, more sustainable, not because you are stronger, but because the internal biological environment has changed. In other words, fasting does not make you strong overnight. It shows you how deeply you have relied on food to regulate stress, emotion, and energy. And when you stop viewing fasting as a moral test, stop judging yourself for completely normal brain responses, something crucial happens. You begin cooperating with your nervous system instead of fighting it. And it is within that cooperation that real willpower finally has the chance to form, not through force, but through intelligent adaptation over time. 3. Hunger is not the enemy. It is an adaptation signal. One of the biggest reasons people quit intermittent fasting within the first week is not fatigue, not lack of motivation, but hunger. Yet paradoxically, they don't quit because hunger is too intense. They quit because they misunderstand what hunger means from the very beginning. From childhood, we are taught that hunger is a danger signal. Hunger equals low blood sugar. Hunger means something is wrong. Hunger is something that must be eliminated as quickly as possible. So when hunger appears during fasting, the brain's almost automatic reaction is panic. Something is wrong. I'm harming my body. This can't be healthy. But modern biology tells a very different story. Especially in the early days of fasting, hunger is not an emergency signal. It is a transition signal. It indicates that the body is beginning to change how it uses energy, and that change does not happen instantly or smoothly. Imagine the body as a house that has been powered by a single energy source its entire life. That source is fast, convenient, and always available. Biologically, that source is glucose from regular meals. When you fast, you're not just skipping a meal. You are temporarily closing the valve on that familiar energy source. And the moment that valve is closed, the body must begin searching for another way to operate. But the switch does not flip immediately. Before fat burning can occur efficiently, the body must gradually deplete glycogen, the stored glucose in the liver and muscles. And it is precisely during this in-between phase, when the familiar source is declining but the new source is not yet fully active, that hunger appears. Not as a sign of failure, but as a phase transition alarm. Biologically, hunger during this stage is largely driven by a hormone called ghrelin. What's important is that ghrelin does not respond to the body's actual energy levels. It responds to eating habits. If you are used to eating breakfast at 7 a.m., ghrelin will appear at that time asking, "Where's the food?" Not because you're about to run out of energy, but because the brain is still operating on the old schedule. And here is something very few people know. Ghrelin does not rise endlessly. It works in waves. If you do not respond immediately, hunger will naturally subside. It disappears not because you ate, but because the brain begins adjusting its expectations. So today we're doing something different. But if every time hunger appears you panic and eat immediately, the body never learns that lesson. The system remains locked in glucose mode, and fat burning never truly activates, not because you aren't strong enough, but because you never allowed the body to adapt. This is why people who make it through the first few days often describe a very different experience. Hunger comes and goes. It no longer dominates the mind. It no longer feels threatening. And after a few days, the hunger clock begins to be rewritten. You are no longer hungry at the old times. The body has updated its schedule. At this point, a subtle but critical shift occurs. Hunger is no longer a command. It becomes information. You feel it, but it no longer controls you. And the moment you stop seeing hunger as the enemy, you begin to understand that fasting is not a battle against the body. It is a process of learning how to cooperate with your own biology. 4. Fasting does not work alone. It amplifies your lifestyle. There is a quiet but extremely dangerous misunderstanding surrounding intermittent fasting. The belief that simply not eating is enough. That fasting by itself will burn fat, balance hormones, and heal the body, regardless of how the rest of your life is being lived. This idea is very appealing because it promises a simple solution for systems that have long been dysfunctional. But biology does not work that way. Fasting does not exist in a vacuum. It is not separate from sleep, stress levels, hydration, electrolyte intake, or the quality of the meals you eat when you break the fast. In reality, fasting does not fix your lifestyle, it amplifies it. If your foundation is solid, fasting will make things better. But if that foundation is already cracked, fasting will make those cracks more visible than ever. Start with sleep. When you sleep fewer than 6 hours per night, the body enters a state of chronic vigilance. Cortisol rises, blood sugar becomes unstable, and hunger and sugar cravings intensify. In that context, fasting does not bring clarity, it brings stress. The brain does not distinguish whether you are fasting for health or simply sleep-deprived. It only knows that energy is lacking and the system must be protected. Then there is hydration and electrolytes. When you fast, you are not only skipping calories, you are also skipping sodium, potassium, and magnesium minerals that usually come from food. If these are not replenished, symptoms that are easily misunderstood appear. Headaches, dizziness, fatigue, irritability, lightheadedness when standing up. Many people experience this and conclude that fasting is making them weaker, when the truth is far simpler. Their body is dehydrated and low on salt. Then comes the eating window. Many people fast for 16 or 18 hours, only to break the fast with ultra-processed foods, fast sugars, and refined carbohydrates. Blood sugar spikes, insulin surges, and then crashes. The next day they wake up hungrier, more exhausted, and convinced that fasting doesn't work for them. But the problem is not the hours without food. It is what was eaten. Fasting has no magical power to compensate for a chaotic lifestyle. If your life is chronically stressful, your sleep irregular, your nutrition poor, and your water intake insufficient, fasting will not save you. It will make everything clearer, sharper, and harder to avoid. And that is precisely why fasting often makes people feel worse at first, not because the method is wrong, but because it shines a direct light on problems that have existed for a long time. Yet this is exactly where fasting reveals its true value. It acts like a biological mirror. It forces you to confront questions you may have previously ignored. Am I sleeping enough? Am I drinking enough water? Am I eating from real hunger or from stress? Am I nourishing my body? Or am I punishing it? When fasting is placed within a healthier context, consistent sleep, adequate water and electrolytes, nutrient-dense meals, stable circadian rhythms, the body responds very differently. Hunger becomes lighter. Energy stabilizes. The mind becomes clearer. Not because fasting has special powers, but because the entire system is finally working in the same direction. Fasting is not a savior. It is a mirror. It does not heal your wounds, but it shows them to you honestly. And only when you are willing to see that full picture does fasting truly become a supportive tool rather than a burden or an endurance test. 5. Comparison is the fastest path to quitting. One of the quietest yet most destructive reasons people abandon intermittent fasting too early is not hunger, not fatigue, but comparison. Comparison with others, comparison with success stories online, comparison with results that sound extraordinary but lack context. And along with comparison comes another obsession: losing fat as fast as possible. From the very first days, many people enter fasting not with the mindset of learning their own biology, but with a countdown timer in their head. How many days until the scale must go down? How long until the belly flattens? Why did that person feel lighter after 3 days, while I feel exhausted and even gain weight? And when the answers do not come quickly enough, a familiar conclusion appears: fasting isn't for me. They's waited. What very few people understand is this: no one starts from the same biological point. Some people enter fasting with relatively stable insulin, decent sleep, low stress, sufficient muscle mass, and still flexible metabolism. Others begin from an entirely different foundation: chronically high insulin, years of visceral fat accumulation, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and hormonal disruption. Those two bodies cannot respond the same way, and they should not be judged by the same metric. When you compare your progress to someone else's, you ignore the most important truth. The body does not race. Biology does not care who is faster. It only cares whether the system feels safe enough to change. And safety is not built through pressure. The obsession with rapid fat loss often leads to increasingly extreme decisions. Eating windows are narrowed repeatedly. 16 hours becomes 20. 20 becomes OMAD. Then 2-day fasts, 3-day fasts, 0 calories. Each step is justified by the same flawed belief: faster is better. But the body does not understand that logic. When pushed too far, its response is not cooperation, but defense. Metabolism slows. Cortisol rises. Hunger becomes more intense. Energy collapses. And the irony is this: the harder you push for speed, the slower the results become. Not because you lack discipline, but because the body only releases fat when it feels safe, not hunted. Another mistake tied to scale obsession is ignoring the early signals the body is sending. When the scale has not moved, people assume nothing is happening. But in reality, many critical changes occur before fat loss becomes visible. The mind becomes clearer, a sign that ketones are rising and the brain is adapting. Digestion feels lighter as the gut gets rest. Evening cravings fade as hunger hormones begin to stabilize. These are not side effects. They are milestones. Fasting is a process of rebuilding trust between you and your body. If you approach it with urgency, pressure, and deadlines, the body retreats in fear. But if you approach it with patience, understanding, and respect for biology, the body begins to open. It shows you that real strength does not come from forcing endurance, but from giving the system enough time to recalibrate. Fasting is not a competition. It is not a place to prove who is more disciplined. It is a deeply personal journey where you learn to listen to subtle signals instead of chasing loud results. And when you stop comparing, stop obsessing over speed, and begin paying attention to your own biological rhythm, that is when fasting stops feeling like a battle and starts becoming a long-term process of cooperation. Number 6. Emotional hunger. What fasting reveals most clearly. There is a form of hunger so subtle that even people who have fasted for years often confuse it. It does not come from the stomach. It does not begin with physiological emptiness. It appears as restlessness, a vague sense of lack, an urge that is hard to name. And many people call it hunger. But in reality, it is emotional hunger. In modern life, food has long ceased to be just fuel. It has become a tool for emotional regulation. When stressed, we eat to calm down. When bored, we eat to fill the void. When lonely, anxious, or exhausted, food provides an immediate moment of comfort. The brain learns this lesson very quickly. Each time sugar, salt, or fat enters the body, dopamine rises, pleasure appears. And over time, the brain draws a simple conclusion: eating is the fastest way to feel better. The problem is that the brain does not clearly distinguish between physiological hunger and emotional hunger. When you feel psychologically unsettled, the reward system can activate the same brain regions as when you are truly low on energy. The hunger feels real, the craving is vivid, and because it is familiar, you respond out of habit by seeking food. Fasting does something that very few nutritional strategies can do. It breaks the circuit. When you no longer eat at the old times, when food no longer appears immediately each time emotions fluctuate, the entire system becomes exposed. Emotions that were previously covered by eating suddenly rise to the surface. Anxiety has nowhere to hide. Boredom becomes unmistakable. Mental fatigue is no longer soothed by a quick meal. And this is the moment when many people begin to panic. They feel hungry constantly and believe they lack willpower. They blame themselves for being out of control. But the truth is, they are not weak. They are facing a pattern that has been trained for many years, a pattern in which food always acted as the intermediary. Neuroscience shows that emotional hunger can activate the same brain regions as physiological hunger. This explains why you genuinely feel hungry even when the body still has sufficient energy. And because of this, overcoming emotional hunger is not about enduring or gritting your teeth. It begins with a simple yet powerful step: recognition. When a craving appears, instead of asking, "Should I eat or not?" ask, "What am I feeling right now?" Did this craving come after a stressful message, after a long, exhausting day, or after a moment of emptiness? When you are able to name the emotion, something strange often happens. The hunger diminishes, not because you ate, but because the brain no longer needs to use hunger as a messenger for psychological discomfort. In this way, fasting becomes more than an eating method. It becomes a tool for inner observation, a map that shows how you have used food to regulate emotions. And when you begin to see this without judgment or self-blame, a deep transformation starts to take shape. You no longer eat to escape emotions. You begin learning how to stay with them, understand them, and let them pass. This is why, for many people, fasting ultimately changes not only the body, but also the relationship with themselves. When hunger is no longer a command, when emotions are no longer suppressed with food, you reclaim a quiet yet profound sense of agency, not control through force, but clarity that comes from understanding what you truly need. Number 7, obsession with rapid weight loss will ruin everything. There is a very dangerous turning point that many people fail to notice when they begin fasting: fear of eating. At first, they simply want to do things right, but after a few days of successful fasting, a quiet thought appears: if not eating burns fat, then eating even less must burn fat faster. And from that moment on, fasting stops being a biological rhythm and becomes a tense negotiation with one's own body. The eating window gradually shrinks. Meals become smaller. Protein gets cut back. Healthy fats are avoided. Even vegetables lose priority. Many people tell themselves they are eating clean, but in reality, they are eating inadequately, lacking energy, lacking nutrients, lacking the safety signals the body needs in order to cooperate. And the body does not stay silent in response. It responds clearly, just in ways people often misinterpret. When you eat too little for too long, the satiety hormone leptin begins to drop. It becomes harder to feel satisfied even after eating. At the same time, the hunger hormone ghrelin rises, making hunger more frequent and more intense. Cortisol, the stress hormone, also increases not because you are weak, but because the body is trying to protect itself from prolonged deprivation. The result is a familiar spiral. The tighter you restrict, the hungrier you become. The hungrier you become, the more exhausted you feel. The more exhausted you feel, the easier it is to lose control. Many people mistake this spiral for a lack of willpower. They blame themselves for not maintaining discipline, for sudden cravings, for eating more than planned. But the truth is, this is not a moral failure. This is biology resisting. The body is not designed to cooperate in an environment where it constantly feels threatened. When energy and nutrients are insufficient, its priority is not fat loss, it is survival. And in survival mode, everything slows down. Metabolism does not increase as expected. It becomes more conservative. Fatigue becomes constant. Mood fluctuates. Sleep is disrupted. Training performance declines. The paradox appears. You are fasting more seriously than ever, yet the results are worse. Not because fasting is wrong, but because you have turned it into a form of undernourishment. Fasting was never designed to make you eat less at all costs. Its purpose is to eat at the right time, not to eat in fear. When meals are treated as the enemy, the body receives a very clear message. This environment is not safe. And when the environment is unsafe, the body holds on to fat, holds on to energy, and resists change. Ironically, many people miss the very signs that fasting is actually working because they are too focused on the scale. Meanwhile, foundational changes have already begun. Clearer thinking as the brain learns to use new fuel. Lighter digestion as the gut gets rest. Evening cravings fading as hormones begin to stabilize. These are not side effects, they are biological milestones. They show that the body is cooperating, it simply has not yet moved into the visible fat loss phase. Fasting is a process of rebuilding trust between you and your body. If you approach it with pressure, deadlines, and deprivation, the body will retreat into defense. But if you approach it with timely nourishment, adequate nutrients, and an absence of fear, the body will gradually lower its guard. And only then can fat be released naturally, without force, without paying the price of exhaustion. 8. The fasting window is a tool, not a title. There is a very quiet pressure that deeply affects many people's fasting experience. The pressure to choose the right fasting window. Is it 16:8 or 18:6? Should you move up to 24? Is OMAD a higher level? Along with these numbers come countless stories shared online. Someone says they lost weight very quickly with a 20-hour fast. Someone else insists OMAD made them sharper and clearer than ever. These stories sound convincing, and they plant an uncomfortable doubt in the listener's mind. Am I doing this too lightly? From that moment on, the fasting window stops being a tool. It becomes a measure of personal worth. The longer you fast, the more disciplined you are. The narrower the eating window, the more correct it is. And if you feel tired, hungry too early, or unable to fast as long as others, you begin to doubt yourself, instead of questioning how you are applying the method. But the body does not read the clock. It does not know whether you are doing 16, 8, or 24. The body only responds to biological signals. Insulin levels, nervous system state, sleep quality, stress load, and fuel switching capacity. The numbers on the clock are just time structures. They are not laws, not medals, and certainly not proof that someone is better than someone else. Fasting works best when it matches the body's current state, not someone else's success story. Metabolic flexibility is a trainable skill, but like any skill, it develops at an individual pace. A body under high stress, poor sleep, high insulin, and chronic fatigue will not respond well to extreme windows. Forcing it to fast longer does not burn fat faster. It only increases pressure, tightens the nervous system, and makes fasting feel heavy. A smarter approach is to start small and listen. Some days, 12-12 is enough. Some phases, 14-10 fits better. When the body stabilizes, 16-8 becomes light. And only when the system is comfortable switching fuels do longer windows begin to make sense. More importantly, fasting does not need to look the same every day. A sleep-deprived, stressful day should not be forced into the same mold as a well-rested one. Day-to-day flexibility is not a lack of discipline. It is respect for biology. When you begin to see fasting this way, signals that once caused worry become useful data. Getting hungry too early may indicate unstable blood sugar regulation. Shakiness or brain fog may signal electrolyte deficiency or poor sleep. Easy fasting followed by overeating when breaking the fast may reflect inadequate meal quality. None of these are failures. They are information for adjustment. And here, fasting returns to its proper role, an adaptive tool, not a rigid doctrine. It does not ask you to live by someone else's schedule. It invites you to explore your own biological rhythm. When you stop using fasting windows to prove something and start using them to listen to your body, fasting stops feeling like a test and starts becoming a sustainable rhythm of life. 9. Eating is not the enemy eating. Too little is. There is a major paradox many people fail to notice when fasting begins to work: fear of eating. At first, fasting brings a sense of control. You skip meals. You get through hunger. You feel like you're doing something right. And then, quietly, another thought slips in. If not eating burns fat, then eating even less must be better. No one says it out loud, but the body starts being treated as if meals are a threat. From that moment, the eating window stops being a time for nourishment and becomes a period filled with anxiety. You count every bite. You avoid protein because it has too many calories. You avoid healthy fats for fear of breaking the fast. You eat quickly, lightly, minimally. And you call that discipline. Biology calls it insecurity. When you eat too little, especially in the context of fasting, the body does not receive the signal that energy will return adequately. Leptin, the satiety hormone, begins to fall, making it hard to feel satisfied even after eating. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, rises, making cravings more frequent and more intense. At the same time, cortisol increases to keep you alert and vigilant against the threat of scarcity, not because you are weak, but because the body is doing its protective job. And so, a spiral forms. You fast, you eat too little, hormones fall out of sync, hunger intensifies, you feel out of control, you blame yourself. Then you tighten restrictions even more to fix it. That spiral is not a lack of willpower. It is biology being pushed into a corner. The irony is that, in this state, fat does not decrease faster. On the contrary, the body tends to hold on to fat because fat is survival insurance. When the environment feels scarce and stressful, the body does not release stored energy. It conserves it. Metabolism slows. Energy drops. Mood fluctuates. Sleep becomes disturbed. And the person begins to believe fasting is draining them, when the real issue is inadequate nourishment. Fasting was never designed to make you eat less at all costs. Its purpose is to create rhythm, periods of pause for repair and periods of intake for safety. When meals are treated as the enemy, the message sent to the nervous system is clear. This is an environment that requires defense. And in such an environment, fat loss is not a priority. What many people miss is this: fasting begins to work before the scale changes. Mental clarity improves as the brain adapts to new fuel. Digestion becomes lighter as the gut rests. Evening cravings fade as hormones stabilize. These are not side effects. They are the first signals that the body is cooperating. But if you are too focused on eating less and watching the scale, you will miss them. Fasting is a process of rebuilding trust between you and your body. When you eat enough, eat quality food, and eat without fear during the eating window, the nervous system begins to lower its guard. Hormones gradually return to their natural rhythm, and only then is fat released sustainably without force, without paying the price of exhaustion. Fasting does not ask you to fight your body. It asks you to show your body that it is safe to change. 10. Sleep, water, electrolytes matter as much as fasting. There is a very common paradox among people new to fasting. They are very good at skipping meals, but they neglect the most basic things that allow the body to tolerate it. They are proud of fasting 16 or 18 hours, yet sleep less than 6 hours a night. They try to be disciplined with food, but drink very little water and pay almost no attention to electrolytes. Then, when the body responds with fatigue, dizziness, and irritability, They conclude that fasting is not for them. But most of the time, the problem is not the absence of food. It is the absence of recovery. Sleep is the most underestimated yet most influential factor in the fasting experience. When you do not get enough sleep, the body enters a baseline state of stress. Cortisol is already elevated, and in the context of fasting, it rises even more easily. Cortisol destabilizes blood sugar, triggers false hunger signals, and causes the brain to constantly demand glucose. At the same time, sleep deprivation lowers leptin, the satiety hormone, and raises ghrelin, the hunger hormone. The result is that even if you fast correctly, your brain still feels deprived, restless, and never truly satisfied when you eat. Many people experience this state and think they are becoming weaker because of fasting. In reality, they are trying to regulate energy while the nervous system is not getting rest. Fasting is already a challenge of energy coordination. Without a recovery foundation, that challenge becomes many times heavier. Then there is water and electrolytes. When you stop eating, you do not just stop consuming calories. You also stop consuming sodium, potassium, and magnesium minerals the body still needs every day to maintain nerve signaling, muscle contraction, and blood pressure stability. Without replenishment, symptoms that are easily misunderstood appear. Dull headaches, lightheadedness when standing, persistent fatigue, mood changes, irritability. Many people feel this and believe fasting is making them weak, when in fact, they are simply low on water and salt. The important point is that all of these issues are preventable. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night is not a luxury. It is a requirement for hormonal stability. Drinking enough water is not a minor detail. It is the foundation that prevents the brain from confusing thirst with hunger. And gentle electrolyte replenishment, a pinch of sea salt, mineral water, or water with lemon and salt can make a significant difference in how hunger and energy feel throughout the day. When sleep deepens, something remarkable happens. Fasting becomes easier. Blood sugar stabilizes. The brain quiets down. Hunger loses its intensity. When you drink enough water and have sufficient minerals, morning hunger sometimes disappears entirely, not because fasting is magic, but because the body is no longer misreading biological signals. Fasting is not deprivation. It is biological optimization. But optimization is not only about knowing when not to eat. It is about knowing when and how to give the body exactly what it needs. Adequate rest, consistent hydration, appropriate electrolytes. These are not side details. They are pillars. Fasting is just one part of a three-legged system. Fasting, hydration, and recovery. When one leg is weak, the entire system wobbles. But when all three are strong, you do not just lose fat. You experience a completely different state of being, more stable, clearer, and requiring less resistance. And that is the true sign that fasting is finally working with you, not against you. 11. Training at the wrong time will make you think fasting isn't for you. One of the most common and understandable mistakes when starting fasting is the belief that if you want to burn fat faster, you need to train harder. And so many people walk into the gym highly motivated, on an empty stomach, with low energy but very high expectations. They believe that training while fasted will burn fat faster, harder, more efficiently. But what happens afterward is often the exact opposite of what they expected. Dizziness, extreme fatigue, shaking hands, shortened workouts, and by evening, the body responds with intense cravings, followed by compensatory eating in a state of lost control. Then the familiar conclusion appears. Fasting makes me weaker. Fasting isn't for me. But very few people stop to ask a more important question. Is the problem really fasting, or is it the timing and method of training? In the early phase of fasting, the body is still adapting metabolically. It is not yet accustomed to using fat as its primary fuel. Blood glucose is declining. Glycogen, the fast energy source, is not fully depleted, but no longer abundant. Ketones are not yet high enough to compensate. You are in a between fuel stations state. And that is not the time to demand high performance. High-intensity workouts, such as HIIT, heavy lifting, and strenuous cardio, rely heavily on glucose. When glucose is low and the fat-burning system is not ready, muscles simply lack sufficient fast fuel. Performance drops. Dizziness appears. The body signals to stop. This does not reflect weakness. It reflects biology that is not yet prepared for that demand. At this stage, what the body needs is not force, but support for transition. Light to moderate movement, brisk walking, gentle strength training, stretching, yoga, easy cycling, or steady stair climbing has a completely different effect. These activities do not drain energy. They send safety signals. They improve insulin sensitivity, increase growth hormone, and help the body learn to use fat more efficiently. Research shows that light movement in a fasted state can significantly increase fat burning compared to post-meal training when performed at the right intensity and time. Light does not mean useless. Light here means appropriate for current biology. Once the body has adapted more fully, often after a few weeks, energy stabilizes, the mind clears, hunger becomes less disruptive, and training intensity can gradually increase. At that point, heavier training closer to the eating window, or morning cardio once fat burning is established, can feel very different. But that is a later step, not the starting point. The golden rule here is simple. Do not let fat loss goals turn training into a form of self-punishment. Every increase in stress raises cortisol, and high cortisol is a signal to hold fat, especially abdominal fat. Ironically, the harder you force speed, the tighter the body holds on. Fasting and training should not be a confrontation. They should be a dance. When you listen to biological rhythms and choose the right timing and intensity, the two support each other. And when they align, what happens is not just fat loss, but a complete reconstruction of the body's energy system, sustainably, without exhaustion, without trade-offs. You can have the right method. You can have a reasonable fasting schedule. You can eat well, sleep enough, and train intelligently. But if one thing is missing, there's a very high chance you'll still quit sooner than you expect. That thing is not discipline, not knowledge. It is purpose. Fasting, by its nature, is not always comfortable. There will be days when hunger comes earlier than you want. Days when energy is lower than expected. Moments when your environment does not support you. And if you begin this journey only to lose a few kilograms before a vacation, or simply because it's trending, then every small discomfort quickly becomes the perfect reason to stop. Not because you are lazy, but because your brain does not see a reason big enough to keep enduring. When there is no why, every challenge feels meaningless. But when you have a clear purpose, the fasting experience changes completely. Hunger is no longer punishment. It becomes data. Fatigue is no longer failure. It is a signal to rest or replenish electrolytes. Emotional fluctuations are no longer weakness. They are signs that the nervous system is being restructured. Purpose is the anchor. When everything feels unstable, it keeps you grounded. And that purpose does not have to be grand. It can be deeply personal, very real. I want to sleep well again without medication. I want to wake up in the morning with a clear mind. I want to break the cycle of eating from stress. I want to feel that I am in charge of my body instead of being dragged along by it. When fasting is tied to a genuine reason, it stops being a weight loss trick. It becomes a journey of reconnection. You don't just change your waistline. You change how you respond to stress, how you listen to hunger, and most importantly, how you talk to yourself. At this stage, you no longer need praise. You no longer need external validation. Because you know exactly what you are doing and why you are doing it. Every day you continue is not a perfect day, it is a conscious day. And that is what creates sustainability. In the end, fasting is not just about eating or not eating. It is a deeply human journey. A journey of learning to listen to the body without judgment, without fear, without force. In that space, Many people rediscover a sense of biological, mental, and emotional stability they had lost long ago without even realizing it. If you've stayed with me all the way here, chances are you're not just trying to lose a few kilograms. You are searching for clarity, control, and a healthier relationship with your own body after years of exhaustion, stress, and living on autopilot. Fasting does not promise an easy path. It is not a miracle, and it is not punishment. It is an honest dialogue between you and your own biology. And sometimes, through hunger, through tiring workouts, through nourishing meals, you realize something essential. Your body never needed you to push it harder. It only needed you to listen, adjust, and walk with it patiently. So give it time. Give yourself trust. And remember that every small step you take today, drinking more water, going to bed earlier, extending your fast by 30 minutes, is sending a new signal to your entire metabolic, nervous, and hormonal system. You are not moving slowly. You are moving in the right direction. If you want to continue this journey with science, clarity, and sustainable motivation, stay with this channel. We don't just share information. We walk with you, video by video, phase by phase, breakthrough by breakthrough. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.